So imagine you just pulled off, like, the absolute biggest win of your entire career.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, right. Maybe you finally got that massive promotion you've been sweating over for 5 years, or you just sold your startup, or maybe your creative project finally just went totally viral.
Right, the champagne has popped, everyone is clapping.
Exactly. Your bank account looks completely different. You are on top of the world, but right at that exact moment of absolute undeniable triumph, your brain starts doing something really terrifying.
Oh yeah, it starts rewriting history.
Yes. It begins whispering to you that you didn't just work hard or, get a lucky break. It tells you that you are fundamentally a genius.
It's a very seductive whisper, too.
It really is. It whispers that you're entirely self-made, that your peers are just, well, slightly inferior to you, and most dangerously, it tells you that the rules applying to normal people no longer apply to you.
Right, because you're special now.
Exactly. So today we are taking a deep dive into the exact moment that confidence mutates into, like, a terminal disease.
It really is the ultimate Trojan horse of the human psyche, isn't it?
Totally.
I mean, we willingly open the gates and let this voice inside because it feels incredibly good. It soothes our deep-seated insecurities and validates all those sleepless nights we put in.
But the psychological reality is that once this force gets inside the walls, it systematically dismantles our connection to objective reality.
It cuts the brake lines on our judgment just as we are rapidly accelerating.
Which is terrifying. And that is exactly why we are diving into the profound insights of Ryan Holiday's book, Ego is the Enemy.
A fantastic source to unpack.
Really is. Our mission today is to basically pull this invisible saboteur right out into the light and examine exactly how it operates. Holiday breaks down the human experience into 3 distinct phases: aspire, success, and failure.
Right, because ego attacks you differently in each of those stages.
Exactly. We're going to explore the unique ways this adversary comes after you in every single one of those phases. And we're going to arm you, the listener, with the psychological tools to fight back.
I love that. But I think before we get into the tactical defense, we really need to clearly define the threat.
Good point. When we use the word ego today, we need to be highly specific.
Yeah, because if we use the clinical Freudian model, we get completely lost in the weeds.
Right, the whole id, ego, superego thing.
Exactly. Freud pictured the ego as like a rider on a horse, where the horse is our wild, unconscious animal drives.
And the ego is just the rational mind desperately trying to steer the beast so we don't crash.
Right. And that is useful in a psychoanalytic setting, sure. But it's completely unhelpful for what we're talking about today. The ego we are hunting today is the casual, everyday definition.
Which is basically an unhealthy, rigid belief in our own supreme importance.
Yes, it's not just confidence. I think we need to make that distinction clear.
Right, because confidence is based on actual evidence.
Yeah?
Ego is arrogance, completely detached from evidence.
It is the petulant child residing inside the adult mind that just demands to get its way simply because it exists.
Yes. The worst kind of roommate.
Truly. It's that need to be recognized as better than, more than, and smarter than everyone else, way past any reasonable utility.
It's like a sense of superiority and absolute certainty that vastly exceeds the bounds of your actual talent. When your internal narrative gets so inflated that it literally bends the light of reality around you, making it impossible to see your own flaws or, other people's value, that is the ego at work.
And what gives this deep dive such weight, I think, is that the author, Ryan Holiday, he didn't write this from the safety of some ivory tower.
No, not at all. He lived the catastrophe.
He really did.
The prologue of the source material is this brutal autopsy of his own early life. So he drops out of college at 19.
Which is a bold move to begin with.
Super bold. And by 21, he was the director of marketing at American Apparel.
Which, for those who don't remember the mid-2000s, American Apparel wasn't just a clothing brand.
Oh, it was a cultural juggernaut. It was wildly controversial, highly lucrative, just incredibly fast-paced.
And Holiday was right in the center of the storm, signing major rock bands, running massive ad campaigns.
And by 25, he had published a controversial, smash-hit, best-selling book.
I mean, talk about peaking early.
He had the money, the elite access, the press clippings, the complete highlight reel.
And that highlight reel is exactly what creates the massive gravitational pull of the ego.
Right.
When you achieve that kind of dizzying success at such a young age, the neurological temptation to craft a mythology about your own innate brilliance is, well, it's nearly overwhelming.
You literally start to believe your own press releases.
You do. But objective reality has this notoriously violent way of correcting those mythological stories.
It really does, because within a shockingly short span of time, the entire architecture of his life just collapsed.
It all came crashing down.
American Apparel faced hundreds of millions of dollars in debt and spiraled toward bankruptcy. The founder, who was Holliday's primary mentor, was unceremoniously ousted by the board and literally ended up sleeping on a friend's couch. The talent agency Holliday consulted for completely unraveled. And, his own internal life started tearing at the seams.
Yeah, he found himself severely overworked, highly stressed, and dealing with debilitating panic attacks.
There's this particularly haunting anecdote in the text. He returns home after weeks on the road, just totally exhausted, and the Wi-Fi in his house isn't working.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And he just collapses on the floor into an inconsolable panic attack, obsessing over a few emails he couldn't send.
It's wild to think about, but if we look at the mechanics of a panic attack in that context, the nervous system literally cannot distinguish between a physical threat to survival, like a predator, and a threat to the ego's manufactured identity.
Right. His brain thought an unsent email was literally going to kill him.
Because his entire sense of self-worth was completely tied up in his productivity and his status.
Exactly.
That collapse on the floor, that's the sound of an ego that has been stretched so far past reality that it finally just snaps.
He realized that the relentless drive that propelled him to that early success carried this highly toxic radioactive half-life.
He was completely trapped inside the echo chamber of his own mind.
And his reaction to the psychological crucible is fascinating to me. He didn't just go on a meditation retreat and write a book. He went to a parlor and permanently tattooed the phrase, "Ego is the enemy," on his right forearm.
That is quite the commitment.
Right. But it functions as an environmental design choice.
Yeah, it really does. Every time he reaches for a door, every time he swims, shakes someone's hand, he is forced to visually confront the destructive power of his own arrogance.
Because the ego is not something you defeat once in this grand cinematic battle.
No, if you aren't actively suppressing it, it will Sisyphus-like roll the boulder right back down the mountain, usually the exact moment you think you've safely reached the peak.
So how does this invisible saboteur actually operate in our day-to-day lives? I mean, to understand how it ruins us at the pinnacle of success, we have to start at the very beginning of the journey.
Right, we have to look at the aspire phase.
We all start somewhere, right? You have a vision, a goal, a desire to make a dent in the universe. But the sources highlight that right out of the gate, there is a massive trap waiting for us.
The trap of talk.
Yes, the trap of talk.
Talk is cheap to produce, but it is incredibly expensive to our future potential.
So true.
Now more than ever, our technological environment just fans the flames of our ego before we have actually accomplished a single tangible thing.
I mean, historically, only politicians, cult leaders, or massive celebrities had the platform to broadcast their daily intentions.
Exactly. Today, every single person has a global broadcasting network in their pocket.
Right. You can announce a completely half-baked goal to hundreds or thousands of followers and instantly receive this flood of dopamine through likes, congratulations, and premature validation.
It's the neurological equivalent of eating a massive, decadent dessert right before sitting down to a steak dinner.
Ooh, that's a great analogy. You eat that giant slice of cake, and your brain receives all the signals of caloric density. You feel entirely full, satisfied, and happy. Your body says, "Great job, we are nourished."
But you haven't actually consumed any complex nutrients or protein.
Zero. When you post online, "I'm officially starting my novel," or "I'm launching a disruptive tech startup," and the comments flood in saying, "So proud of you," or "You're going to crush it," your ego harvests the emotional reward of the finish line without having run a single step of the grueling race.
That analogy hits the underlying mechanism perfectly, because talk actively saps the specific type of deep, focused energy we desperately need to execute the work itself.
Right. Stephen Pressfield defines this internal friction as the resistance.
Yes. The resistance is that powerful psychological force that actively repels us from doing the hard, unglamorous work of creating art or building a business.
Overcoming it requires a massive concentration of willpower.
But talking about what we are going to do acts like a pressure release valve. It flitters that concentrated willpower away in small, completely useless bursts of social validation.
The sources provide a really stark cautionary tale about this with Emily Gould.
Oh, yes, Emily Gould.
She was a prominent writer and former Gawker blogger who managed to secure a massive six-figure book deal.
Which, for anyone in the writing world, is the ultimate dream realized.
It's the lottery. You have the advance, you have the publisher, you have the mandate to write.
But instead of writing, she got completely paralyzed for 2 full years.
2 years of absolute stagnation, and the autopsy of that paralysis is so fascinating. She spent her days blogging, constantly updating her social media feeds, writing long emails, and essentially performing the identity of a writer for an online audience.
She subconsciously substituted the public appearance of doing the work for the private agony of actually doing the work.
Because the ego is obsessed with the label.
It loves being able to say, I am a published author.
But the ego absolutely despises the reality of the process. You know, sitting alone in a quiet room, wrestling with a blank screen, feeling totally inadequate, and slowly stringing terrible sentences together until they become good ones.
It's painful. And I think a lot of us can relate to that on a micro level.
Oh, absolutely. We buy the expensive running shoes, we make the perfect workout playlist, we post a picture of the gym, but we don't actually lift the weights.
So if talk is the trap and performing an identity is the poison, what is the actionable antidote?
Right. How are we supposed to start our ambitious journeys without triggering this ego trap?
The antidote introduced in the text is something called the canvas strategy.
The canvas strategy. Okay, let's unpack that.
To understand it, we have to look back at an ancient Roman social dynamic, specifically the role of the antiambulo.
The antiambulo, what does that mean?
In the crowded, chaotic, and dangerous streets of ancient Rome, wealthy patrons needed to physically move through the city to conduct business. The antiambulo, which literally translates to one who clears the path, was the person who walked in front of the patron.
Literally pushing the crowd out of the way.
Exactly. They pushed the crowds aside, delivered messages ahead of time, and ensured the patron's journey was entirely frictionless.
Okay, I'm going to challenge that right away, because my immediate reaction, and I imagine the listener's reaction is, doesn't that just mean being a sycophant?
That is the natural objection.
I mean, in a modern corporate environment, if I just put my head down, do all the grunt work, and make my boss look like a genius, I don't become a canvas. I become a doormat. People just steal my credit and pass me over for promotions. How does Holiday differentiate between strategic humility and just letting yourself get exploited?
That is the exact pushback the ego generates, and it's a vital distinction to make. The ego violently rejects the idea of being subservient because it equates subservience with a loss of worth.
Right.
But true sycophancy is just shallow flattery designed to extract a quick favor. It's kissing up.
Yeah.
The canvas strategy is entirely different. It is a highly calculated, strategic reduction of your own ego at a critical phase of your development so that you can absorb the maximum amount of knowledge without obstruction. It is not about being a doormat. It is about becoming indispensable.
Okay, so it's less about kissing the ring and more about an aggressive form of apprenticeship.
Precisely. It is the ultimate apprenticeship. When you are aspiring, you must intellectually accept 3 harsh realities. First, despite your talent, you are not nearly as good as you think you are.
That's a tough pill to swallow.
Second, you possess an attitude and a sense of entitlement that desperately needs recalibrating.
Also tough.
And third, the vast majority of what you learned in a theoretical classroom is practically useless in the messy real world.
So true. So by identifying a highly successful person and actively clearing their path, meaning you anticipate their bottlenecks, you solve complex problems before they even register them as problems, and you generate ideas and hand over the credit, you are buying a front row ticket to greatness.
You are getting an elite education that no university could possibly offer, and you're getting paid to do it.
But how does giving away the credit actually serve your long-term goals? Like, isn't the point to get recognized?
Here is the hidden mechanism of power in the canvas strategy. The person who physically clears the path ultimately controls the direction of the journey.
Whoa, okay.
Think about the metaphor of a painter and a canvas. The painter gets all the public glory, the applause, and the signature on the art. But the canvas is the physical medium that silently dictates the boundaries, the texture, and the shape of the painting.
Oh, I see.
When you serve as the canvas for someone else's success, you are quietly learning their mental models, you're observing their network, and you're building the exact skills that will fuel your own eventual ascent.
You endure the grunt work, you stay out of the dangerous glare of the spotlight, And you let the compound interest of your competence speak for itself.
Yes.
But man, that strategy requires a staggering amount of restraint, particularly when you feel you are being wronged.
It's incredibly hard.
Which brings up one of the most powerful historical examples in the sources, Jackie Robinson.
A perfect example of restraint.
Right. When we typically discuss Robinson breaking the color barrier in Major League Baseball, the narrative focuses heavily on his phenomenal athletic talent. But the real superpower he possessed, the trait that actually changed history, was his profound, almost superhuman restraint.
The historical context is crucial here. The legendary baseball executive Branch Rickey didn't just randomly select Robinson because he had the best batting average.
No, he was looking for a very specific mindset.
Rickey spent years actively searching for a specific psychological profile. He needed a player who possessed the immense pride and competitive fire required to dominate at an elite level, but who also possessed the psychological fortitude to actively suppress that pride and not fight back when provoked.
And the provocations were just horrific. We're talking about virulent racism, pitchers intentionally throwing fastballs at his head, opposing players spiking him with their cleats, hostile stadiums screaming slurs at him.
And the ego's biological evolutionary impulse in that scenario is the fight-or-flight response. The amygdala screams, "Attack! I am a human being. I deserve respect. Do you know who I am?"
Of course. And if Robinson had indulged that natural, ego-driven impulse, if he had thrown a single punch or charged the mound or demanded the respect he rightfully deserved, the entire delicate experiment of integrating American baseball might have violently failed right then and there.
The opposition was actively trying to trigger his ego to prove he didn't belong.
Exactly. What Robinson understood is the masterclass in psychological sovereignty. He realized that enduring abuse doesn't degrade the victim, it degrades the abuser.
It degrades them.
Yes, the lack of reaction acts like a mirror, forcing the aggressors to look at their own barbarism.
But how do we apply that? I mean, obviously, the stakes for the listener aren't integrating baseball.
Right, hopefully not.
But let's say a coworker completely throws you under the bus in a meeting, or a client is incredibly disrespectful. How do we suppress the urge to snap back?
Well, you have to tie your restraint to a much larger mission.
Right.
When you are playing a long, strategic game, you simply cannot afford to have your emotional state hijacked by your immediate impulses or your pride. You have to willingly absorb the minor slights, the unfair compromises, and the people who step on your toes.
You don't suppress your anger because you are weak. You suppress it because your ultimate mission requires a clear head, and reacting to petty provocations is a distraction you just cannot afford.
And importantly, the sources show us that we don't just need restraint when we are under attack. We desperately need restraint when things actually start going our way.
Yes. John D. Rockefeller provides a fascinating blueprint for this.
Oh, I loved this part. Long before he became the wealthiest man in modern history, he was just a young bookkeeper in Cleveland who finally got a decent job and started making a little bit of real money.
And he came from a highly volatile background with a con man father. So having actual savings was a monumental shift in his reality.
Right, it was a massive paradigm shift. And because he was smart, he could literally feel the pride creeping into his psyche. He could feel himself starting to look around and think, I am quite the brilliant merchant. I have this all figured out.
But he recognized that this early arrogance was incredibly dangerous.
Yes. So he instituted this highly unusual psychological practice. Every night, in the privacy of his room, he would have out loud conversations with himself. He would aggressively audit his own ego.
He would literally say to himself, "Because you have got a start, you think you are quite a merchant. Look out, or you will lose your head. Go steady."
I love that. He didn't just think it, he spoke it out loud.
By speaking it, he forced the thought out of the subjective echo chamber of his own mind and turned it into objective advice.
He was actively negotiating with his own hubris.
He understood a fundamental law of human nature. Pride takes a minor early accomplishment and artificially inflates it into a major permanent victory.
And pride dulls the very instrument we rely on to survive and succeed, our mind.
Exactly. Our curiosity, our flexibility, our willingness to adapt, all of those cognitive tools are instantly blunted the second we convince ourselves we've arrived.
Which perfectly sets up the next critical evolution in the aspire phase. Because if we can successfully execute the canvas strategy, if we can endure slights with restraint, and if we can suppress that early intoxicating pride, we unlock the ability to actually learn.
And that brings us to the concept of becoming the eternal student.
The Stoic philosopher Epictetus captured the essence of this hurdle over 2,000 years ago.
He stated plainly, "It is impossible to learn that which one thinks one already knows."
It's the old Zen parable of the teacup. If your cup is already overflowing with your own opinions, you can't pour any new tea into it.
Exactly the mechanism at play. To achieve greatness in any field, you must cultivate the habit of continually updating your appraisal of your own talents.
And usually you must update that appraisal in a downward direction.
Yes, you have to actively hunt for feedback, especially harsh critical feedback that punctures your self-image. The problem is, the ego absolutely despises remedial training.
It views itself as a finished, spectacular product.
Right. Yeah.
So how do we systematically force ourselves to remain students? How do we build an environment that outsmarts the ego?
Well, there's the system from Frank Shamrock, the pioneer of mixed martial arts.
Oh man, I am obsessed with this system. It is such a pragmatic, actionable framework. He calls it the plus, minus, and equal system.
The brilliance of Shamrock's system lies in its structural simplicity.
Yeah, break it down for us.
He argued that to become truly elite at any discipline, whether it's cage fighting, investment banking, or writing code, you must maintain 3 specific types of people in your life at all times.
Okay, who are they?
First, you need a plus. This is someone who is objectively superior to you in skill, whom you can constantly learn from and apprentice under.
Your mentor, basically.
Right. Second, you need a minus. Someone who is lesser than you in experience, whom you can teach and mentor.
Your student.
Exactly. And third, you need an equal. Someone exactly at your skill level whom you can continually challenge yourself against in real time.
I love thinking of the ego like a tire on a high-performance car. The plus, your mentor, is the pressure gauge. They ensure you don't overinflate and blow out on the first pothole because they constantly demonstrate how much further you have to go.
They represent a hard ceiling on your arrogance.
Yes. That's a great way to visualize it. And the minus, the student you are mentoring, acts as the mechanic. When you are forced to break down complex concepts to teach a beginner, it exposes the gaps in your own foundational knowledge.
And psychologically, interacting with a beginner forces you to reconnect with the struggle and the frustration of not knowing. It generates empathy.
Right. It prevents you from becoming a detached, arrogant expert who forgets how hard the climb actually is.
And the equal is the actual road testing the tread of the tire.
Now, I can see how having a mentor keeps you humble and having a student keeps you grounded. But how exactly does the equal purge the ego? Couldn't peer just become like a toxic rival?
That is a risk in poorly managed environments.
Why?
But when used correctly, the equal is the ultimate lie detector.
Ah, a lie detector.
Yeah. If you only train with people worse than you, your ego inflates because you win every day. If you only train with masters, you might get totally demoralized. The equal forces you to test your skills under immense, evenly matched pressure.
They shatter the illusions you might have built up about your own dominance, while simultaneously purging the fear that makes you doubt yourself.
The plus-minus equal system creates an inescapable, continuous feedback loop of objective reality. You simply cannot lie to yourself inside that matrix.
It's brilliant. And Genghis Khan actually utilized a remarkably similar psychological tool with his own sons and generals.
He did. Genghis Khan conquered a massive portion of the known world, but he was terrified that his heirs would become soft and arrogant.
Right.
He relentlessly warned them that if they couldn't swallow their pride, they would lose the empire.
Yeah.
And he used this profound natural analogy. He would tell them, even the tallest mountains have animals that, when they stand on it, are higher than the mountain.
I love that visual so much. You endure the freezing cold, you climb to the absolute highest peak of Everest, you plant your flag, and you look over, and there's a mountain goat just casually chewing on some grass looking down at you.
It violently forces perspective.
It forces you to realize that altitude does not equal invincibility. Okay, so let's say the listener successfully navigates all of this.
All the hurdles of Aspire.
Right. You use the canvas strategy, you endure the slights, you build your plus-minus equal matrix, you put in the grueling work, and finally, you achieve the goal. You graduate from the Aspire phase.
You've made it.
You get the VC funding, you win the championship, you make partner at the firm. Human logic tells us that the danger is over. You've won.
Right.
But neurologically speaking, doesn't achieving the goal actually make the ego exponentially more dangerous?
Oh, without a doubt. This is the great paradox of achievement. When the underdog finally wins, the ego mutates.
It mutates.
It evolves from being a pesky nuisance into a highly contagious, fatal disease. because the psychological environment at the top of the mountain is unforgiving. You are surrounded by people who agree with you, you have access to capital, and your previous gambles have all paid off.
It's the intoxication of arrival. You look at your bank account, you look at your title, and your ego starts reading a brand new script. It says, I'm not aspiring anymore. I actually am special. Look at what I built. Therefore, the normal rules of physics, economics, and human decency that apply to everyone else down below, they no longer apply to me.
And that intoxication is incredibly insidious because, unlike other diseases, it actively masks its own symptoms from the host.
Which is terrifying.
Harold Gene, the pioneering CEO who built the massive ITT conglomerate in the mid-20th century, studied this phenomenon closely. He compared this executive egotism to alcoholism.
Interesting.
But he pointed out a terrifying difference. He noted that an egotist doesn't stumble around the office knocking over lamps. They don't slur their words or smell like liquor.
Yeah, they don't look incapacitated. They wear a tailored suit and speak clearly.
Exactly the problem. Instead of looking drunk, they become increasingly bold and arrogant. And because they are in a position of structural power, the people surrounding them, their employees, their board members, often mistake that arrogance for extreme self-confidence, vision, and authority.
Oh, wow. So they enable it.
Exactly. And the executive themselves starts to mistake their own erratic arrogance for raw power. They do not realize they have contracted a cognitive disease that is rapidly rotting their judgment from the inside out.
They begin to live entirely in a world of their own imagination, genuinely believing that every thought they have is brilliant and every decision is infallible.
They become a complete menace.
Which brings us to the severe perils of paranoia and the delusion of absolute control. Let's really unpack the psychology here. Getting to success requires a massive force of will. To build something from nothing, you have to push past doubters.
You have to ignore people telling you it's impossible.
Well, it has to be slightly irrational. But once you achieve success, doesn't that exact same force of will become a liability?
It becomes a massive liability if it isn't strictly tempered.
How so?
The stubbornness and relentless drive that allowed you to break through walls during the aspire phase will cause you to drive your car off a cliff during the success phase. The force of will mutates into a delusion of absolute control. You begin to believe that reality itself must bend to your demands.
The ultimate, darkly comical historical example of this delusion from the sources is the Persian Emperor Xerxes.
Oh, this story is wild.
The context here is insane. Xerxes is commanding the greatest military force the ancient world had ever seen to invade Greece. He needs to march his massive army across the Hellespont, which is a treacherous, violent strait of water separating Asia from Europe.
Right.
He has his engineers accomplish this logistical miracle. They build massive pontoon bridges across the water. But then a severe storm rolls in and violently destroys the bridges.
A completely indifferent meteorological event. Just a simple shift in atmospheric pressure.
Exactly. It's just nature. But Xerxes is so thoroughly infected with the disease of ego, his sense of power is so absolute that his brain literally cannot compute the idea that something in the universe does not bow to his command.
And how does he react?
He orders his soldiers to throw heavy iron chains into the rushing river to bind it. He orders the water to be given 300 lashes with a whip and to be branded with hot irons.
It's hard to even picture.
He actually commands his men to yell at the river, chanting, "You salt and bitter stream, your master lays this punishment upon you for injuring him."
And of course, to complete the cycle of toxic ego, he executes the brilliant engineers who built the bridge, blaming them for the weather.
Naturally. It sounds like pure insanity.
Yeah.
But if we pull back the curtain, how different is that from a modern CEO screaming at their IT department and firing people because a server crashed during a product launch?
It's the exact same psychological malfunction.
It's whipping the river. It's punching a hole in the wall because you stubbed your toe.
It is a highly recognizable modern pathology. When you're accustomed to conquering markets, dominating negotiations, or controlling thousands of employees, any form of natural friction or resistance feels like a deliberate, personal betrayal.
Entitlement assumes, this outcome is mine. I have decreed it.
Yes, and when the chaotic world fails to comply, the ego cannot accept its own lack of control, so it breeds paranoia. You start believing your team is actively trying to sabotage you.
You micromanage brilliant people because you assume incompetence.
You deliver exhausting tirades. You construct a massive persecution complex to intellectually justify your own tyrannical behavior.
The legendary basketball coach, Pat Riley, coined a perfect term for this: the disease of me. It destroys locker rooms and boardrooms alike.
It really does.
And the text provides a brilliant contrast in how leaders handle this disease, particularly by examining World War II generals. On one side, you have iconic figures like George S. Patton and Bernard Montgomery.
They were undoubtedly brilliant tactical commanders, but they were notoriously consumed by the disease of me. They constantly demanded the spotlight. They bickered like children over who would get the glory for taking a specific city.
Right, they were deeply obsessively concerned with their press clippings and their image in the history books.
And on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, you have General George C. Marshall.
The chief of staff.
He was essentially the architect of the entire Allied victory. He had more power than anyone. But he operated in a completely different psychological framework.
He quietly executed his duty. He actively avoided the applause. In fact, he famously refused to keep a diary during the war.
We really need to analyze why Marshall refusing a diary is so profound.
Okay, let's do it.
Think about the psychological function of a diary for a powerful person during a world-altering event. Why do they write it?
They write it to shape the narrative. They want to ensure future historians view them favorably.
Exactly. Marshall recognized that writing a diary invokes an invisible audience. It triggers what is essentially the psychological equivalent of the observer effect in quantum physics. The act of observing a phenomena changes its behavior.
That is a fascinating parallel.
Marshall knew that if he felt he was performing for the eyes of future historians, his ego would subconsciously alter his real-time life or death decisions. He feared he might hesitate on a necessary but unpopular strategic choice simply because he was worried about how it would look in his memoirs.
Wow. He recognized the danger of the narrative, so he literally put the mission above his own myth. He eliminated the audience, which starved the ego.
That is the core mechanism of surviving success. Humans have a deep evolutionary impulse to craft a coherent narrative out of the chaos of our past. We want to smooth out the lucky breaks, ignore the embarrassing mistakes, and weave a grand, arcing storyline of our own Herculean destiny.
But the moment you start believing the myth you've spun about your own life, you become arrogant. You stop doing the gritty work that made you successful in the first place, and you turn into a caricature of yourself.
Bill Walsh, the legendary coach who built the San Francisco 49ers dynasty in the 1980s, understood the danger of the myth perfectly.
Oh, his approach was brilliant.
When he took over the 49ers, they were the worst team in professional football. The franchise was a disaster. The temptation for a new leader in that scenario is to walk into the locker room, give a sweeping cinematic speech about destiny, and promise a Super Bowl.
Like in the movies.
Exactly. But Walsh didn't do that at all.
He deliberately avoided the grand narrative.
Instead, he implemented what he called his standard of performance. This was not about sweeping visions. It was a maniacal focus on deceptively small micro-actions.
Like what?
He mandated exactly how a player should tuck in their shirt. He instructed the front desk receptionists on the precise verbiage to use when answering the phone. He focused on the exact angle a wide receiver should plant their foot when running a specific route.
So he demanded absolute execution of the immediate task at hand, ignoring the macro outcome of winning games.
Because the macro is an illusion. You can't control the macro.
Right. The media wanted to label Walsh a genius. They wanted to build a myth around him. But Walsh knew that accepting the label of genius is the first step toward losing your competitive edge. Focusing obsessively on the daily, microscopic standard is what anchors your brain to reality when the rest of the world is desperately trying to put you on a pedestal.
Which leads us directly into the necessary antidote. If the success phase acts as an intoxicating drug that induces paranoia, entitlement, and the disease of me, how do we sober up?
Right. How do we detoxify the brain while maintaining our positions of leadership? The sources highlight a modern example that really underscores the tactic of sobriety. Angela Merkel.
A great example.
She served as the Chancellor of Germany for over a decade, making her arguably the most powerful woman in the world and the de facto leader of Europe during immense crises. Yet, despite her staggering global influence, she maintained a shockingly normal, modest private life.
She lived in a standard apartment in Berlin, not a grand palace. She shopped for her own groceries. Her husband famously skipped her first inauguration because he had to work.
That modesty is frequently written off by the media as just a quirky, endearing personality trait. But psychologically, it is a highly deliberate, calculated defensive tactic against the ego.
When you exist in an environment of extreme power, where sycophants constantly agree with you and logistics are handled by a fleet of assistants, Your brain loses its connection to the friction of normal human existence.
Surrounding yourself with normalcy, doing your own laundry, waiting in line at the grocery store, acts as a powerful environmental counterbalance.
It is a hangover cure for power. It systematically eliminates the destructive obsessions of the ego. The need to demand first-class treatment, the worry over your elite image, the expectation to be constantly marveled at.
She recognized that the luxurious trappings of power are actually a massive distraction from the intense cognitive load required to actually do the job of leading.
But beyond just environmental design, the sources introduce a deeper, philosophical antidote to the ego of success. It is a concept the Stoics referred to as sympathia.
Sympathia, or cosmic sympathy. Let's talk about that.
It is the profound oceanic feeling of being inextricably connected to the entire cosmos, while simultaneously recognizing how infinitesimally small and temporary you are.
The ego survives by demanding that we are the center of the universe. It convinces us that our specific stress, our bank account, our company's Q3 earnings, and our personal grievances are the most important things that have ever existed in the history of time.
Right.
Let me challenge that for a second, though, because I can hear a listener thinking, if I want to feel better and stay grounded, I need to remind myself that I am a completely insignificant speck of dust in the universe. Doesn't that just kill ambition entirely? Why build anything if it doesn't matter?
That's a fair question, but it doesn't kill ambition. It kills anxious, ego-driven ambition and replaces it with purposeful ambition. It is not about feeling worthless. It is about calibrating your perspective.
How does that look in practice?
The astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson articulates this duality brilliantly. He notes that when he looks up at the vastness of the night sky, he knows he is small, but he also feels big because he is fundamentally connected to that universe made of the exact same stardust.
It's the difference between feeling uniquely alone and burdened by your own self-importance versus feeling small but relieved because you belong to an immense, enduring system.
Exactly. When you are caught in the suffocating whirlwind of success, you must actively seek out physical experiences that force your ego into submission. Go walk alone onto an ancient battlefield. Stand at the edge of the ocean at midnight and listen to the relentless crashing of the waves. Look up at a clear night sky.
When you look at an ancient Roman ruin or a Civil War battlefield, you are violently reminded that generations of ambitious, stressed, powerful, brilliant people stood exactly where you were standing.
They lived, they fought, they wept, they thought they were the absolute center of the world. And now they are entirely gone.
The earth absorbed their empires, just as it will inevitably absorb ours.
It induces the realization that Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote about, the idea that every person is simply a quotation from all their ancestors. It physically draws your mind out of its myopic, self-obsessed bubble and forces you to confront the broader questions. What is my actual role in this world? What am I contributing to the human chain?
You simply cannot maintain a fevered, entitled, paranoid ego when you are truly meditating on the immensity of the natural world and the long arc of history.
It acts as an existential grounding rod.
And we desperately need that grounding because the universe does not care how successful your startup is or how many followers you have. Gravity applies to everyone. Entropy is an unavoidable law of thermodynamics. Reversals of fortune are absolutely inevitable.
And this brings us to the final phase of the deep dive, failure.
Right. Every empire eventually falls. Every historic bull market corrects. Every successful winning streak regresses to the mean.
In professional sports, the schedule gets harder, the salary cap forces you to lose players, and age slows you down. In business, competitors reverse engineer your product, macroeconomic shifts destroy your margins, or a new technology renders your entire model obsolete.
Or in life, you simply make a catastrophic mistake. Or you become the victim of pure, random bad luck.
And when that violent crash happens, whether it takes the form of being fired, losing a major election, having your company go bankrupt, or facing a humiliating public scandal, the ego, which was so heavily inflated during the success phase, is suddenly exposed as incredibly fragile.
In the field of psychology, this specific reaction is called a narcissistic injury.
Right. When things go catastrophically wrong, the healthy mind accepts the objective reality of the failure and looks for a solution.
But the ego-driven mind cannot tolerate the objective reality because it shatters the myth of their own perfection.
So the ego takes an indifferent external event and internalizes it as a profound personal attack.
It screams, "This is entirely unfair. Why is the universe doing this to me?"
And by doing so, the ego adds massive self-inflicted psychological injury to the initial external injury. It wastes energy complaining, it desperately blames subordinates, it plots elaborate revenge fantasies.
By absolutely refusing to accept the reality of the failure, the ego guarantees that it will learn absolutely nothing from the experience.
The sources provide two incredibly vivid, contrasting reactions to catastrophic failure. The first reaction is toxic escalation.
Let's look at Lance Armstrong. He built a global, billion-dollar athletic empire and an inspiring personal mythology on a complete lie. He was systematically doping.
But when the evidence slowly started to mount, when the journalists started asking real questions and the spotlight of truth hit him, his ego simply could not handle the exposure.
He didn't just deny the allegations, he went on the offensive. He viciously attacked former friends, he sued journalists into bankruptcy, and he actively destroyed the careers and reputations of anyone who threatened his false image.
He escalated a sporting scandal into a moral monstrosity.
Threatened egotism is arguably one of the most destructive forces in human psychology.
When the ego is cornered, when the imposter syndrome is finally validated by the outside world, an animalistic fear of weakness completely takes over the brain. Armstrong could not bear the thought of losing his elite esteem, so he actively chose to inflict massive collateral damage on innocent people rather than face the humiliation of the truth.
But then, look at the contrast with Steve Jobs. Jobs experienced one of the most public, humiliating failures in modern business history. The board of directors at Apple, the very company he founded in his garage, fired him.
It was a complete demolition of his identity. Holliday refers to this kind of event as a Fight Club moment.
A Fight Club moment. What exactly does that mean?
It's when your life is thoroughly painfully demolished. The elaborate narrative you've constructed about your own genius is shattered into a million pieces, and everything you thought was permanent is rendered false.
It is agonizing.
It is. But it is also the ultimate catalyst for profound psychological change.
I want to really unpack the mechanics of that change. You mentioned the term catabasis earlier in our notes. What does that descent actually look like neurologically?
Catabasis is a concept from Greek mythology, the hero's descent into the underworld. Think of Orpheus or Hercules. Psychologically, when you experience a massive failure, your brain is plunged into crisis.
Right.
It is forced to prune away all the superficial neural pathways and vanities. You descend into the dark, but in that darkness, you are forced to confront the fundamental, unvarnished truths about who you are and what you actually care about.
Jobs didn't spend the next decade in the underworld suing Apple and wallowing in bitter revenge. He used the catabasis.
He used the humility that the failure forced upon him. He went on to found NXT, which was a massive learning experience in the wilderness. He bought Pixar, where he had to learn how to collaborate with brilliant creatives rather than just dictating to them.
When he finally returned to Apple years later, he wasn't the erratic, hyper-egotistical, unmanageable kid who got fired. He was a mature, focused leader who possessed the temperance to build the most valuable company on the planet.
He fundamentally chose alive time over dead time.
This is an incredible concept from author Robert Greene that Holliday highlights. Let's dig into that.
When you face a severe setback, when you are trapped in a failure, a terrible job, or a literal prison of your own making, you face a fundamental binary choice.
You can choose dead time, which is wallowing in misery, feeling intensely sorry for yourself, complaining about the unfairness of the world, plotting revenge against your enemies, or simply numbing the pain with mindless distraction.
Or you can choose a lifetime. Reading, learning new skills, ruthlessly evaluating your own mistakes, improving your character, and actively transforming yourself for the future.
Malcolm X is perhaps the ultimate historical embodiment of choosing a lifetime.
Unquestionably. As a young man, he was a street hustler who got caught and sent to a grim 1950s prison. That environment is designed to be the ultimate dead time.
He could have easily just done his sentence, stared at the wall, nurtured his anger, and emerged a hardened, identical version of the man who went in.
Instead, he made a conscious decision to make that cell intensely alive time. He realized his lack of education was a vulnerability, so he requested a dictionary and literally copied the entire book by hand, page by page, to master the English language.
Which is just staggering dedication. He read philosophy, history, and religion voraciously. He completely rewired his brain and transformed himself from a petty criminal into one of the most articulate, powerful orators of the 20th century, all while sitting inside a locked cage.
I think about that in the context of our daily frustrations. It's like being stuck in a massive, unmoving traffic jam on the highway.
Oh, that's the perfect analogy. You can grip the steering wheel, honk your horn at the cars in front of you as if sound waves will magically move metal, scream at the windshield, spike your cortisol levels, and arrive at your destination exhausted and furious.
That is dead time. The traffic isn't moving whether you yell or not.
Exactly. Or you can accept the reality of the immobile traffic. Recline your seat an inch, put on an audiobook, learn a new language, or mentally structure the project you have due next week.
That is a lifetime.
You are physically trapped in the car either way. The objective reality hasn't changed. The only variable you control is how you utilize the time.
And the ego desperately demands dead time because dead time is comfortable. It requires absolutely no self-reflection or effort. It allows you to wrap yourself in the warm blanket of victimhood.
Right. A lifetime, on the other hand, requires immense humility. It requires you to look in the mirror and admit, I am in this situation. A portion of this is likely my own fault. What can I extract from this pain to make myself better?
And this brings us to the final, crucial piece of the psychological puzzle. The inner scorecard and the ultimate value of effort.
Because choosing a lifetime and letting go of outcomes is the only possible way to survive the failure phase without losing your sanity.
If you solely measure your personal worth by external success, your net worth, your job title, the applause of your peers, then failure will absolutely obliterate you because failure explicitly takes those external markers away.
This is where we must adopt Warren Buffett's concept of the inner scorecard. Buffett didn't invent the concept out of thin air. He drew heavily on the 18th century philosopher Adam Smith, who wrote extensively about the idea of the indifferent spectator.
Let's break down the indifferent spectator. How does one actually construct that in their mind? Is it a voice? A checklist?
Think of it as an objective referee residing in your prefrontal cortex. Smith argued that human beings have a terrible habit of judging their own conduct based on the applause or the boos of the crowd.
But the crowd is notoriously fickle, emotional, and frequently rewards terrible, unethical behavior if it yields short-term results.
Exactly. To combat this, Smith said we must evaluate our actions by viewing ourselves through the eyes of an imagined, completely impartial, indifferent spectator. We must hold ourselves to our own highest, uncompromising internal standards of integrity and effort, completely independent of the world's reaction.
Because the terrifying truth is that you can completely win the game and still be a total fraud. You can cheat the system and get the gold medal. You can lie to the public and win the election. You can sell a defective product and make $1 billion.
The external scorecard prints out a receipt that says you are a massive success, but the inner scorecard knows you are morally and intellectually bankrupt.
And the inverse is equally true, and perhaps harder to swallow.
How so?
You can do everything perfectly right. You can operate with absolute honor, flawless execution, and tireless work ethic, and you can still lose.
That is a bitter pill.
It is. The macroeconomic environment might crash. A competitor might engage in illegal espionage. Your boss might be deeply insecure and sabotage your promotion out of jealousy. If your ego is entirely tied to the external outcome, this scenario will breed a crushing, toxic resentment that will poison the rest of your life.
But if you have cultivated a rigorous inner scorecard, you can look at the devastating defeat and say, I did the right thing. I executed my plan. The outcome was governed by variables outside of my control, but my effort was flawless.
That sounds incredibly noble, but I can hear the objection. Isn't an inner scorecard just a convenient cop-out for losers? A way to feel good when you fail?
That's what the ego says, but the sources provide a historical story that completely demolishes that objection. It's the story of Belisarius, arguably the greatest military general of the Byzantine Empire.
Oh, Belisarius. He was a winner. He repeatedly saved the entire empire from total destruction. He conquered vast territories. He brilliantly defended Rome, and he was flawlessly, unwaveringly loyal to the Emperor Justinian.
He was the absolute pinnacle of competence and loyalty. And how did Emperor Justinian reward this unparalleled service? With intense paranoid jealousy.
Justinian was terrified of Belisarius's popularity with the troops and the public. So he repeatedly stripped Belisarius of his command right on the verge of total victory. He took away his personal guards, and eventually he stripped the general of all his hard-earned honors and wealth.
A normal, ego-driven leader would have instantly revolted. Belisarius had the absolute loyalty of the army. He could have marched on the capital and overthrown Justinian in a weekend. He could have defected to the enemy and become a king.
But he did none of those things.
No. He accepted the humiliation. He remained steadfastly loyal and returned to the defense of the empire whenever Justinian hypocritically called upon him. Why?
Because the outcome, the fancy titles, the gold, the public parades, was not his metric of success. His inner scorecard was his profound sense of duty, honor, and military excellence.
He knew he had executed his job perfectly. The emperor's paranoid jealousy was the emperor's psychological problem, not a reflection of Belisarius's inherent worth.
The effort is enough. That is a tremendously powerful, almost invincible psychological shift. When the execution of the effort itself becomes the ultimate reward, the ego starves to death.
The fragile ego desperately needs the applause to validate its existence. The confident, disciplined mind only needs the quiet knowledge of a job executed to the absolute best of its ability.
I want to contrast Belisarius with another famous conqueror, Alexander the Great. Alexander literally conquered the known world. He had all the external success a human being could possibly achieve, but he was constantly tormented by an insatiable need for validation and dominance.
There is a legendary philosophical encounter recorded between Alexander and Diogenes the Cynic.
Let's set the scene. Diogenes was a radical philosopher in Corinth who essentially lived as a beggar. The philosophy of cynicism at the time involved rejecting all societal conventions of wealth and status.
Diogenes famously lived inside a large clay barrel in the marketplace. He owned nothing, he desired nothing, and he completely rejected the ego.
So Alexander the Great, the most powerful, wealthy, and feared man on the planet, trailing his massive entourage, approaches Diogenes, who is simply lying on the ground, relaxing and enjoying the afternoon weather.
Alexander stands tall over him, casting his shadow, and basically says, "I am the master of the world. What can I do for you? Name your prize."
Alexander fully expects Diogenes to grovel, to beg for a bag of gold or a palace or a position in the court. Alexander's ego is seeking an opportunity to demonstrate its benevolence and supreme power.
And Diogenes, without standing up, without showing an ounce of intimidation, simply looks up at the conqueror of the world and says, "Stop blocking my sun."
It is the ultimate intellectual power move. Even thousands of years later, you can viscerally feel how hard that response must have hit Alexander in the gut.
The most powerful man in the world had absolutely nothing to offer a man who had completely mastered his own ego. Alexander's unimaginable wealth and power meant mathematically nothing, because Diogenes' inner scorecard assigned zero value to it.
That is the definition of true, unassailable independence. The legendary UCLA basketball coach John Wooden, who won 10 national championships, achieving the highest pinnacle of external success, defined success in a way that perfectly encapsulates this entire philosophy.
He explicitly did not define success as outscoring the opponent.
He defined it this way. Success is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction in knowing you made the effort to do your best to become the best that you are capable of becoming.
The scoreboard at the end of the game is out of your hands. The referee might make a bad call, a player might slip, but the effort you exert in preparation and execution is entirely yours.
If you tie your psychological well-being to what other people say, what the market does, or how the universe rewards you, you are handing over the keys to your sanity to a chaotic world. If you tie your well-being strictly to your own internal actions and your own integrity, you become practically invincible.
So let's synthesize this massive psychological journey we've taken today. We have examined the profound ways the silent saboteur of ego attacks us in every single phase of our existence.
During the aspire phase, the ego tempts us with the dopamine of talk instead of the friction of work. It demands we perform an identity rather than executing the canvas strategy, enduring slights with restraint and humbling ourselves as eternal students.
Right. And during the success phase, the ego infects us with the disease of me. It mutates our drive into paranoia, entitlement, and a delusion of absolute control, requiring us to actively seek the sobriety of a normal life and the cosmic perspective of sympathia.
And finally, during the failure phase, the ego turns inevitable setbacks into toxic escalation and dead time, desperately trying to protect its myth. The only survival mechanism is relying on our rigorous inner scorecard and finding total peace in the purity of our effort.
It is a continuous, relentless, lifelong campaign. There is a brilliant metaphor from a martial artist in the source material that ties this entire philosophy together perfectly.
Defeating the ego is not a single, decisive, cinematic battle. You do not slay the dragon of arrogance once and then live happily ever after as a perfectly enlightened being. Fighting the ego is exactly like sweeping the floor.
Sweeping the floor, it's so mundane.
It is intentionally mundane. Just because you thoroughly swept the floor today, it does not mean dust will not settle tomorrow.
Because of the brain's default mode network, the dust of pride, of entitlement, of defensiveness, and of self-pity is always slowly accumulating in the corners of our minds.
It is an inescapable part of the human condition. Therefore, every single day you must wake up, observe the dust, pick up the broom, and sweep the floor again.
It is the daily, unglamorous maintenance of your own character. Whether you are at the absolute bottom of the mountain aspiring to climb, standing at the summit enjoying the view, or tumbling down the side after a devastating fall, the broom is always required.
Sweeping never stops.
I love the pragmatism of that. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over.
Think about the biggest, most stressful, most consuming goal you are currently chasing right now in your life.
The project that is keeping you awake at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
The milestone you feel you absolutely must achieve to be happy.
Now, I want you to audit that goal honestly. Is that objective truly yours? Or was it ghostwritten by your ego simply to prove your worth to a group of people you don't even genuinely like?
What would happen to your stress and to your output if you let that exhausting narrative go and just focused entirely on the quiet, humble work sitting right in front of you?